When you say maybe to somebody, choose, you also need to ask whether the person even have the option that is going to choose from. Because if you give me one, I say choose, I don't think you really give me an option because that is only one. So what do I have to choose?
You know, when someone sometimes talks to me about something new, my automatic reaction is almost to write it off sometimes. No, I don't need to know about that or whatever. And it takes me listening freshly, whatever it's about.
You mentioned of the fact that this automatic machine is there for a reason. How do we get entangled?
What is it you find difficult about that?
Might be because I haven't matured yet enough in where I want to be. How do we know what is responsible for our decisions?
The short answer is maybe we don't.
What do you do with them to help them untangle?
This could sound almost flippant. We have a conversation.
Who do not know that it is possible for them to make a connection to their ancestral roots? I want to thank you so much, Dave, for taking the time to join me here. Why don't you tell me something about yourself? Then we are just going to roll about the conversation. Please go.
What about myself? I'm based here in London. I've been a coach and consultant for about 25 years, and I've been involved in human development in some way for over 40 years. And before I moved into this field, I was in the hospitality industry mainly. I used to be a chef, and then I spent some time in sales. But I'm passionate about really working with people and making a difference, enabling people to be effective, have extraordinary lives, and really make the difference they want to make in the world.
All right, that's lovely. That's lovely. There is a lot that really can be that we are going to unpack in the course of the conversation.
Okay.
You have been in the hospitality industry. You basically are mostly into human development. And all this you have done in a number of years. So you have accumulated a lot of information that we're interested in here. All right. But Dave, how we do here is that we usually take a step back to be able to understand where you are coming from. So tell me something about you. Were you born in London?
Yeah, I was born in London.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me something about you growing up in London.
What to tell you? My parents weren't from England, and I grew up in London. On one hand, I had a great time. You know, on one hand, I had a very good upbringing, very safe, comfortable upbringing. And I found it challenging at school. I didn't respond well to how children behave, if you know what I mean. The kids tease, you could call it bullying, but they tease and so on. It didn't respond well. So right through to being a young man, I found that challenging. I had some friends, but I didn't socialize very, very well. And and I suppose I got into self-development as a response to that in a way.
All right. You see, all these are part of what make you who you are today now.
Absolutely.
In that, exactly. They are important. Because life, sometimes, we are not the one that design it. We are just experiencing life, no? Of course, only that based on the element that we see around us, we sort of try to recreate the experiences in a way that it can be better for us.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit more about what you see around you growing up in London, so that we can make a comparison between the London of your time as an adolescent and the London of your time as a full matured man now who have got a lot of experiences. Please share with us.
I grew up in northwest London. For those who don't know the area around Golders Green and so on, it's a fairly Jewish area. I'm Jewish heritage. I don't have a religion. If anything, I err towards being agnostic or atheist. But I grew up in that area, and I went to I suppose what's called a progressive school. It was quite radical for its time in terms of Um, it was, the whole idea was to help the youngsters develop and so on, as human beings, as full human beings, which might not sound quite so radical today, but at the time, the comprehensive schools and so on, it was very much a certain design of school. And a lot of people had a misconception about our school. They used to say to me, "Oh, you can do whatever you want there," which wasn't the truth. But I struggled a bit, not socially, but academically. It's not that I didn't have a sharp brain, but I think I was very caught up in dealing with, the different issues I was dealing with, and so didn't apply myself particularly well. What else to let you know? I was I felt I'd been born too late because I loved music from the 1950s, and I was a teenager in the 1970s. I kind of had quite a few friends who were into that, but I also had a lot of friends who were into walking and fishing, and there's still a group of 4 of us who meet up. We did a couple of long walks, and we used to go fishing together back when we were teenagers, and we still meet up just to keep in touch and so on. So it was a good time. It was a good time. I don't think that much different from a lot of youngsters.
So you think there is no much difference between the London of your time as you were growing up and maybe the time of today, looking at maybe, of course, okay, we haven't invented a different society. It's still the same. The problem is still the same, but of course we approach it maybe differently.
It's an interesting thing you ask, because of course there are changes. There are things that people more readily talk about now than they didn't talk about then. Regarding all kinds of things, regarding self-development, regarding relationships, regarding, what people term political correctness, all kinds of things. Also with the internet today, we've got information more readily available, not always accurate information, but information more readily available. My take is that a lot of the issues we're dealing with as human beings are very similar. Let me just give you a couple of examples which I often talk about. My wife came across 2 quotes at one point, and one was about London, describing London and how London was too noisy, too much traffic, too much pollution, too many foreigners, not enough jobs, all those kind of issues. And it could sound like it was from now or the 70s. It was actually from the 1600s. So it's kind of like, on one hand, do we change particularly much? And the other one was a quote she found about teenagers, about how teenagers don't get up in the morning, and they talk in monosyllables, in grunts, and they grow their hair long, and they don't get up till midday, and they won't apply themselves. And this was a quote from one of the Greek philosophers, so thousands of years ago. So it always has been, when I find myself, or I'm hearing other people almost looking through rose-coloured spectacles at the past, or the opposites, like, oh my God, it was awful then. We're dealing with some of the same issues about being human.
That's lovely. It's looking at the arithmetic of life, that it has been the same. Only that if we just sometimes do have more resources to be able to deal with the same problem, but it's basically the same. We are doing the same thing, I love that.
It also reminds me, in some of my mentors have used this phrase a lot in the past, and I think it's quite commonly used. There's a French phrase, and I can't remember the exact wording, but if I'm going to get this wrong, but it's plus ça change, la même chose. Basically, it means the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I think there's a great accuracy in that. It doesn't mean things can't change. It doesn't mean we can't create new things, new ways of reacting, new ways of relating to each other. But it's useful to kind of have our feet on the ground with, as they say, plus ça change. Doesn't change.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think this is going to become more relevant now with the advent of AI, which have given us the chance to be able to do a lot of things. But if we can do a lot of things now, meaning we are able to do more things with less time, we'll have more time. Now, what do we do with that time? So, I mean, we need to do what we have be doing or what we are supposed to do more, which is relating, spending more time, making fun and all of that. I think this is going to become more relevant as we move into the future that is ahead of us, or the one
Well,
we're actually stepping into.
I'll tell you why I'm smiling.
Please.
You're a young man, yeah? So before you were born, when I was a young man, they talked about the future and how we're going to have all these incredible things that would give us more time and we'd have more leisure time. But actually, if you look at, certainly in the UK and London, but a lot of countries across the world, people find themselves working harder, working more hours, working 2 jobs. They don't have that. So I don't know to what extent AI will provide that. We get into a whole conversation about AI. I've no doubt it's an extraordinary tool, but then it's what we do with it as human beings. And, what are the values that are going to drive the way we use it? And it's not something we can impose, but it's everything. What are the values that are going to drive how we relate to each other, how we set up our society, how we set up our education system, all of that.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so relevant. And of course, we could really deep down on that, but that would take us to another rabbit hole. And I'm not sure we are in for it today.
No, I get that totally. I just think it's worth putting those questions out there. I mean, it's the type of, given what I do now, it's when I have people, and I get myself to question this as well, it's, when people actually question that, so, I've never thought of that before. One of my clients turned around to me a couple of years ago and he said, she looked at me, it was on a Zoom call, and he said, you got me thinking things I never thought before. And it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do with that? It's like, oh, okay.
That's interesting. Now that you know, what are you going to do with that?
It's all very well thinking something you never thought before, but how are we going to apply that? What's our purpose here?
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. I think we are going to have to ask ourselves the questions now. Why are we even here? By the way, Dave, let's go into the core of what I think you do, which is the human development. I think there is a kind of a tuition in my head leading to the beginning of the story, because you were saying that you went to a school that is sort of into development of children, how to become better, something like that. And what you do, if I understand it perfectly, if I understand it well enough, it's about this human development. So I'm trying to understand, how did you get there? What led you to that place?
Firstly, to say that possibly the school I went to and what I do now sounding similar might be coincidental. Okay. And how I got to where I got, well, really, really simply, I was working as a young man, and a friend of mine near where I lived used to work in a record shop. And I used to drop in on the way home from work to see him and have a chat. One day he wasn't there. And I said, where is he? And the person said, he's doing this course this weekend. I said, you mean, and some words came out of my mouth. And he said, yes, how did you know that? And I was like, I wasn't sure how I knew that. However, when I'd been in college, someone had told me about this course. And all I was interested in is a young woman who I fancied. And all I was interested in was I going to get somewhere with her. So I sat on the floor of her flat one night, having had a bit too much to drink, trying to keep my eyes open, listening to her. But it has stuck in my mind. So my friend invited me to come and hear about this course. And I was kind of a little bit, like this, arms crossed, and I don't need to know about this. I was young man, heavy leather jacket, big wispy beard, dirtiest jeans I could find, riding a little motorbike. And somewhere in the evening, I heard something. I got awake to something might be available here. And it wasn't even that I knew that I was looking for something, but I just got a sense that something might be available. And eventually after having taken myself away, off to the gents' toilets, look myself in the mirror and splash cold water on my face and said, what's going on? I decided to take a jump, take a risk. It cost, I think, £250 in those days. I happened to have the money available. I decided if it was a con, I was going to use it as an expensive social club. It used to be 2 weekends. It's now 1 weekend, the course. But I did that back then. It just opened my eyes to some things. And I participated in their work for a while, but then at some point I went and did a master's course in personal and organizational development. And that opened my eyes to some other things as well, some other methodologies. And at some point I was working in the city, some back office work, contracts, and I was let go from a contract. And my wife said to me, she said, you've been talking for some years about try and make a go of it, see if you can make a go of it as a coach and consultant. Why don't you take a couple of years and see if you can make it work? And the very short story now is that almost 25 years later, I'm still seeing if I can make it work. That's how I got to there and got a lot of value out of the different things I've done, had an impact in my life. It continues to have an impact in my life. I keep discovering new things. When I work with my clients, I have to discover new things about myself. When I'm working with a team around something, and for about 2 years I've been working with this team, and I'm discovering stuff about leadership I didn't know before, but I've led leadership courses for many years, but here I am discovering new stuff about leadership. So it's always a journey.
Yeah. I think there is a lot of coincidence, both in the terms that we are using and also in the conversation itself. All right, now let me tell a little story. I came from Nigeria. Nigeria some 20 years ago, more or less. So having spent some years here in Italy, I started to research about the presence of Africans in northern Italy. That is still what I'm doing today, only that it has expanded.
Yeah.
So that instead of concentrating on just Italy, I am now talking to a lot of people from different parts of the world, mostly people of African descent, and try to ask the same question. Why are you here? What are you doing? What are your experiences? What can we learn from that? This entire project is called The Journey. So I remember at one point, because we have published a couple of books from the project, I was trying to describe the life of immigrants, people who have left Africa and they found themselves in Europe, like me, like many others that I've interviewed, that we are in a journey. This is just a journey. And if we take it away even from there to regular people like yourself, okay, you happen to be born in London and you are still in London today, but that is quite rare in some cases. In fact, in many people that I know, they are born in one city, they are living in another city, even though they are living in the same country. So this is very relevant for many, many people, whether you are in Africa, in Jordan, in New York, or in San Francisco, because people just keep moving. And it is a good thing for us as human beings, which is to say we are in a journey. I'm just like hitting on that word there. That is very relevant for me. And you say something there. We're here just talking. No, it's like you wanted to say something.
No, I was just think there are a couple of things you're talking about there, which on the one hand, I love what you're saying. I think for me and for a lot of people, being able to view life as a journey, they find useful and empowering. And some people may not. It's all down to the meaning, the interpretation we put on things. And I know that one of your passions is about stories and storytelling, but also stories. And it's an interesting one because for me, there's two ways of using the word story. I love the way you're talking about it when there's a rich story. And sometimes understanding one's story, where one has come from, and all of that, how it's all put together, can make a big difference in our life. But also there's the way the word story is used in a lot of the work I do, but also other avenues of similar work, where story is what we have made up. It's almost like, are you familiar with the phrase blind spot? It's very commonly used today, that phrase. We all make up things as we go through life, which we don't realize we've made up. Some of those things are useful, or they're useful at the time, and they're maybe not so useful later on. It's at 3 years old to make a decision about something to keep us safe or to help us understand something or get through something, but we're still living after that decision at 25, 35, 55 years old. It doesn't always help us in that time. Whether that decision's about whether one's good enough or whether one trusts people or whatever that may be, or I have to be the best. Someone I knew discovered that story in the background for him, and he realized how driven it had made him, how tiring that was. And he was able to, it didn't mean he stopped being extraordinary at things, but he had the freedom to go, I don't need to do that anymore. So there's something about when we identify the story in the background, it gives us the freedom to choose how we're going to move forward. And then we can create while we're here, not necessarily based upon a purpose someone has told us we should have or what we made up as a kid. We can create going forward. So I just think it's interesting, those different words, how they can be used differently. And when we start to explore that, it provides something, some new place we can operate from.
It's interesting. I like the perspective. It is really, really very beautiful. But I think it's within the framework that we actually call story. In that, if our story is not always just remembering the past, it's also the boldness to reinvent whatever you want to call it, the future or the reality. Because somebody might be saying, therefore, what is even reality? What is the difference between being real and being imagined? Okay, one day I was talking to a friend of mine. We were talking about a project that we wanted to do within the diaspora, because most of what I do is within the diaspora reality, And we were talking of organizing a tourism exchange where you have to go to Africa, for example, to learn more about your African root and all of that. So he was saying, my friend, that when you want to do something like this, he want to be sure that it is the reality in the sense of, okay, then I say, okay, but let's take a moment to reflect on that. What does it even mean, reality? Okay, I give him a picture. I say, now imagine that you are standing with another person and in front of you, there is a pothole. Okay, then I gave him a picture very clear in the Nigerian language. Okay, now for you, call it a valley, and a very dirty valley with swamp of water, and there is nothing really beautiful about it, so that can be abandoned. I said, now you are standing in front of you, and somebody that you are standing together tells you that in this valley, I'm going to set up a 10-story building in 5 years. I said, at this time, is it real or not real? I said, okay, let's fast forward time. If this person believes it enough and he have the resources, he set it up. That valley has changed to a 10-story building. Is it real or not real? So what I'm saying in a sense is that our ability to tell story is really fundamentally the most important thing that we can do as human beings. The story that we tell is responsible for the city that we build, the life that we live, even what probably happened when we die. We don't know, but we have invented story to explain it. So your connational, the famous English writer James Allen, in his book As a Man Thinketh, said that artists are the creator of the other world. And of course, he went on to make mention of some of them. I think story is really powerful in that it gave us the ability to be able to reinvent anything that we want. Even when we're to even think back to where we are coming from, it's not because we want to go to the past. We can't go to the past. It's not possible for us. The only thing that is really real is now. What is going to happen in the future, we are merely envisioning it, but we cannot be in the future. Because when we are in the future, we will still be now. It's always now.
Yeah.
But the ability to event and to move towards, and to make our invention real is fundamentally powerful about us. Yeah, it's like you wanted to say something there. I always never want to interrupt.
No, it's great. It's I love what you're talking about, and what I found, and through the different work I've done and so on. I think most people, if they were having this conversation with you, would probably agree with you. People say, yeah, absolutely, it's about being able to create. And I think where we're not so effective at that as human beings is that to be able to do that, it takes being able to identify the unconscious story in the background. Because very often we like the idea of being able to create who we are. And very often that's to avoid something from the past, or as I can't think the word is, a reaction, a response to something from the past. So until we tell the truth about the story in the past and take ownership of that for what it is, just a story, then that if we don't do that, that shapes and colors whatever story we're going to have in the future. But I love it, and I love what you're talking about. Having people discover they're from the African diaspora, going back to their country and rediscovering that as such. It's interesting. I was talking last night with my sister, and our father was Swiss and our mother was South African. And we'd both been to South Africa before, but after our mother died in 2017, we traveled back in 2019 for a month. And we went to a lot of the places we either hadn't been to or only briefly been to in the past, including the little town our mother was born in, which we'd never been to before. And we're talking about, we've never been to the town our father was born in Switzerland. And so we're having a conversation at the moment about when we're going to set that up, because, it'd be a great opportunity to, we've heard about it, we know a bit about it, but being able to see it, being able to experience it, and of course I can never experience it the same as my ancestor, my father or my mother experienced it, but it gives a different connection. And, when we went back to South Africa, we found a way into as well. We found in the Jewish cemetery in South Africa, in the town my mother's family was from, the grave of our grandmother, which we only, by hearsay we knew about. So it just gave us a whole insight into our history and that story.
Thank you so much for that. It's really fundamentally powerful. It is. At least for many people in the diaspora, is true for them. I've interviewed over 1,000 people here.
Wow.
I've done an interview and somebody was crying. Okay, what I'm saying is that this is really emotionally powerful for people, being able to reconnect to their root. So that is why it is very important for us in the diaspora to Okay, now what we are saying is that I am not saying that as a person of African descent in the diaspora, whether you are in the US or in the UK or in Canada or in any other European country, you should pack your baggage and go to where your ancestors came from. That is not what we are saying. What we are saying is we need to make the decision to connect, to spiritually connect or physically connect, to touch that land. That is where you are coming from. You can return to the base. But there is something powerful when you do that. Either you make this connection with the land, with the people, with the experiences, with the air, then you can return to where you are coming from. If you like. But if you feel like, you can make further connection, talk to people, learn about yourself. I remember, for example, a number of occasions talking to a lot of US historian, particularly those that are dealing with African study or Africana study, I have to ask something. I think it is important for you, particularly as a historian talking about Africana study or African study, to make more connection to your root, where you are coming from, your ancestors, where they are coming from, to do some work. I don't know, maybe a kind of a co-research work with other people.
It's interesting.
So what happened there?
If I'm misinterpreting you, correct me. But you keep saying it's important for you, what you've been saying to people. And where I've come to is to use the example you're talking about. I think it's commonly accepted that there's something powerful, there's something useful in being able to do that. And I have a caveat to it, and I'll give you the example. A good friend of mine, haven't seen her for some time now, but she was adopted. And there's a common received wisdom that for adopted people, it's good for them to know the history of where they came from. And now in the adoption process, usually the adopting family creates, or the adoptive services start it, and they create a book for the child so that they have connection, or they even have connection with their birth family. So that's the received wisdom. And I remember my friend saying to me, she said, I've no interest in any of that. She said, I don't need to know who my birth family was. She said, whilst I don't know, I can let my imagination do the work for me. She said, they can be anyone. They could be a couple of tango dancers from South America. She said, I don't need to be disappointed. I don't need to do that. I have the family that brought me up. So why I'm saying that is that I think it can be very powerful what you're talking about. But I can also imagine for some people, it's not where I want to go. I don't want to know about my roots. So yeah, it's I think it's always useful to remember, and I spent a lot of time not doing this, thinking I had the answers for people, but I think it's always useful to remember to check in what someone discovers, what their feelings are, what they feel. And it may be that you're doing that, but it's just the way you were speaking about it felt a little bit like you were saying to those people, you should. So I don't know if that's the accuracy.
Actually, sometimes I am feeling, what we are not discovering.
I get that, and I happen to be on the same page as you. And because I can be so enthusiastic about that, I sometimes need to remember what I just said. It's like to check in, do you even want to discover? I've got people in my life, who've gone, Dave, don't talk to me about that stuff you do. Too scary for me or too uncomfortable. Okay, I got it.
All right. Thank you so much for that.
I'll keep inviting them.
but actually, I think that everybody doesn't have to do this. I don't think everybody have to do it. But the point is that you are really in this area, that you are a coach, We're coming to that just now. When you say maybe to somebody, choose, you also need to ask whether the person even have the option that is going to choose from. Because if you give me one and say choose, I don't think you really give me an option, because that is only one. So what do I have to choose? I just need to accept it. So I think the work that we are doing, or what many people should be exposed to, is the opportunity of that there is this also, so that you can choose. Then maybe you don't like it, that is okay. You don't need to like it. But there are many people that don't know that there is a possibility to do this. So they make their decision without knowing that there is a possibility to also make that choice. That's just it. It's not that everybody must take this road.
I just want to check exactly what you're saying, because
there are many people within the diaspora who do not know that it is possible for them to make a connection to their ancestral root, where they are coming from.
I get that.
So what we are saying, or what I'm saying, is that you don't necessarily need to make the connection if you don't have to. But we're saying that if you want to, there is this possibility to do this.
I get that. I get what you're saying. I mean, I think that's relevant to anything as human beings. There's always stuff that we're not aware of, new possibilities. And I get that you're talking about specifically the opportunity for people from the diaspora to make connection to their ancestral roots, and some don't necessarily know that. So you want to provide that opportunity for them. But yeah, I think it's relevant in all areas of life. When someone sometimes talks to me about something new, my automatic reaction is almost to write it off sometimes. No, I don't need to know about that or whatever. And it takes me listening freshly, whatever it's about.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Now, let's talk a bit about the human development. You see, that word actually clicked on me very much. I love it. I want also expand a bit on that, because I don't know if that is entirely what your coaching is about, or you just attached to it. Or tell me a bit, what percentage of human development what percentage of your coaching does that have to do? Because I really find it interesting.
What percentage? I'm not sure I can answer that question. There are lots of different ways of us developing as humans. We can learn new skills, we can all kinds of things. The way I describe what I do is that any area of our life we want to be more effective. We want to, whether that's in how we think and feel about ourselves, whether that's in how we perform in our jobs or in the difference we make in the world or in our relationships, whatever. Any area that we want to be more effective and we're not moving forward in the way we want to. My assertion is that there's an entanglement of our internal and the external. So the external being, our circumstances, legislation, relationships, all of that kind of stuff. And then the internal, thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, beliefs, attitudes, all of that. And that's, most people will go, yeah, I know that, because it's not rocket science. It's not something strikingly new. It's talked about quite a lot these days. What I do is I enable people to untangle those strands for themselves. So when those strands become untangled, we can actually deal with them. We can look, there's that one. I hadn't seen that. I hadn't realized that before. It was kind of just entangled with everything else in this homogeneous mass. As we untangle them, we can start to deal with them differently. We start to relate to them differently. Actually, even to the extent that people find themselves taking actions, having conversations that were off their radar beforehand. And when I say find themselves, it's not always like, I need to learn something and now how do I apply that? And there is some of that as well, but as we discover new things, as we see things newly, we find ourselves in action differently. And that allows us to produce results that we didn't think were possible. So that in terms of human development, one of the strands of what I do is very much people dealing with the machine that we are as a human being. That automatic ways of thinking, automatic ways of making decisions, which are there for a reason. As we grow up, I mentioned things earlier, as we grow up and we make decisions about what works and what doesn't work and what we can trust and what, avoiding disaster or whatever, or even for some people, they make decisions about having to self-sabotage. Whatever those decisions are, as we untangle that, we get some power to not be governed by them, but to own them, and then to move forward and create choices and purpose that we want to make.
It makes a lot of sense. Entanglement. I'm seeing that, and I'm also seeing. I'm trying to imagine how we got there. But I think towards the later part of your explanation, you made mention of the fact that this automatic machine is there for a reason. Could you please expand on that for the amateur, for the beginners, so that they can get the picture clearer?
It's interesting. I'm not sure there is such a thing as an amateur or a beginner in this. Most of us have some awareness, even though we might not have read stuff, whether we might not have read business models or psychological models or whatever. We have some awareness. And most of us have an opinion about ourselves, whether that's I'm extraordinary, or whether that's, that's not my sort of food, or that's not my sort of activity, or I'm not athletic, I'm not artistic. There's some people I've worked with who've got quite extreme opinions about themselves. Oh my God, I'm awful, or whatever. And we will know more about people with those extreme ones. I'm not a mental health practitioner. I don't pretend to be. So I don't work with people who need a mental health practitioner. But that's on the same scale. People will have whatever's going on internally. And it may be a condition that, they need certain treatment for and so on. But it's the same thing. We have a dialogue, a narrative going on with us that we then respond to. And when we become awake to that, we can have a choice but not just awake to the dialogue, but awake to the nature of it. Oh, that got made up somewhere. Oh, that, there's all kinds of things like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which has you focus and be very awake to what's going on. There are other therapies which don't deal with what's going on, but it's much more about action and so on. But all of it's about understanding what's in the background that we're blind to. And when we can do that and become awake to that, we can have a choice about, do I continue to live out of that, or do I create something new? And sometimes what we've been living out is really useful to us, so we continue living out of it, but being conscious about it makes a big difference. The person I mentioned earlier, who is very, very successful, but he saw that he was driven. He saw he was absolutely driven. He had no choice about how he operated. And when he started to become awake to where that all got made up as a teenager, he had some power with it. He didn't have to be driven anymore. And I can relate to that, because there's, I talked earlier about my childhood. It was, comfortable childhood, but also I found it challenging. And I made up some decisions about myself. And I found where I was driven, and my drivenness was kind of cyclical. So it wasn't driven and I was highly successful. I wasn't highly successful in terms of traditional outcomes and results. Yeah. And I now have a choice to catch myself in that process, and then I can almost breathe. I can give myself some time off. I don't have to. I'm involved in lots of projects and I love them, but it's not anymore to prove something. It's not anymore to, if I can just do this, then everything will be okay. I'm very clear. I'm in that journey. I'm, able to enjoy the journey. Does that kind of make sense for you?
A lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense to me, and thank you so much for the sharing. I have a lot of curiosity there. One of it is, how do we get entangled? Because I'm sure that the part of the automatic machine or the automatic behavior, we still need more clarity on that. But the question is, how do we get entangled? How do we get this information that now control us, that we're not comfortable with, and that we are not changing? Sometimes we don't know that we need to change them because we haven't done enough examination to understand where we stand in the world. We are just in a routine that seems okay, but it's not okay. But the question is, how do we get to that point?
Let me ask you a question. I'm going to be a bit cheeky here and throw it back at you in a way. What is something, if you look at your life right now, because this will probably demonstrate it quite well, what is something that you would like to be better at, maybe have been stuck with, maybe have been frustrated with, or maybe even just ignore? What's something that you have in your life like that?
Where I would like to improve more as I speak is being able to get good results to people from what I'm doing, in this case now, in podcasting, being able to help more people to express themselves more. Because one of the objectives of being here is to help people. I want to be able to learn from people, but first they need to express themselves.
I get it.
Yeah.
So firstly, I love that. What is it you find difficult about that? What is it? Where are you challenged in doing that? Because clearly you're doing, you've interviewed over 1,000 people, all of that. There's a level of success you have at it. But what is the bit you're challenged with?
What I think is a challenge to me might be because I haven't matured yet enough in the progress that I in where I want to be in my podcast journey, in my exploration journey, that I need to mature more so that I will be able to get more results for people.
That may be accurate, okay? And consider that that's a story you have. And by the way, the process I'm going through now will take you to an answer to the question you asked, okay? What if you didn't have to mature anymore? What if you have a perception of yourself, of your circumstances, and of the world which restricts you? What if you have a story about yourself that is constraining, doesn't allow you, that story keeps you smaller than you would like to be?
Yeah, that is possible.
Yeah. And then that story got made up somewhere. Yeah. Now, not always consciously. So, someone I haven't seen for a long time, but became a good friend. He worked in the field of pre and perinatal counseling. So working with people around what happens in the birth cycle, and I was like fascinated by this when I first heard about it, because, when I first heard about this, the received wisdom I had was that, children only start making decisions at such an age and so on, and before that it doesn't. And actually he kind of pricked that bubble that, maybe there's all kinds of stuff that happens and we get imprinting. So he told me stories about people he'd worked with who things had happened when their mother was pregnant with them, and the massive adrenaline rush. My God. So there's stuff that happens pre-language. So there's stuff there. The body is, that's threatening, I'll go into defense mode, doesn't think that through, but it's just as a response. And then our body's still operating out of that. And it took, my default way of thinking is very much up here, is very much understanding. Yeah. So as a kid, one of the ways I found to cope with life was, if I understand a lot, if I can explain things, that helps me. And it did to a certain extent, but it was constraining. But then at some point, I discovered that there was stuff going on internally for me, which I'd never articulated. So it was kind of feelings viscerally. And, one of the things I made up when I was a little kid, I'll come back to talking about you in a second, but I made up as a kid a decision that I can't, so why bother? It's how come I found something challenging. I can't even remember. I don't think I even know what it was, but I found things challenging over a period of time, and I gave up. I learned to give up and be enthusiastic and survive that experience. Have my mom and dad come and help me and so on. And it wasn't until I was quite well into my adulthood that I recognized that there was a physical manifestation of that. And when I got challenged and found myself turning away from something, there was almost like an imperceptible shrug of my shoulders. Now, how that relates to the question you asked is I made some decisions based upon what had happened. And for that 3-year-old or 5-year-old or however old I was when I made those decisions, and other ones that built upon it, that made perfect sense at the time, and it allowed me to deal with something. It allowed me to make sense of the world. It allowed me to deal with being upset or whatever. And then when I was able to recognize that had happened, that didn't need to govern me anymore. So at 3 or 5 years old, it wasn't important for me to kind of go, oh, I'm going to push through this. But in my 20s, 30s, 40s, when I'm, working on my business or applying myself academically or whatever, it's not so great to go, I can't do it and turn away. It's useful to be able to push through something, push through that emotion, whatever. So you're asking about the question about where did it come from? Things happen and we make decisions about life to help us understand life or to get through something. To come back to you, you will have made some decisions. Things will have happened that you perceive the world a certain way, whether it's consciously or not. Whether, at some age, I don't know what decision you made. You would need to look, and it may be in me speaking now, you've gone, oh yeah, I recognize that. Or it may be that in 6 months or a year or 5 years' time, you suddenly go, oh, I've just discovered that. Yeah, it doesn't always happen like that. But does that start to give you an idea of how come we get to that point where we're entangled, those different strands?
Yeah, it's very clear, and it makes a lot of sense too. And that leads me to another question, because the person that is listening to us now is looking for a way to get untangled, which is what you actually do for people. Help them untie the ribbon so they can be free, or so that they can make a conscious decision if they want to remain like that or move to a different direction. But the question is, how do we know what is responsible for our decisions?
The short answer is maybe we don't. And I don't mean that as a cop-out, but it's, you talked earlier about reality, and it's kind of about that as well. We can only ever identify, what's in our memory or what might have happened, and maybe I made that decision. But being able to look at it and identify, oh, maybe I made that, and it kind of makes sense, it fits together, can be very powerful and useful. But fundamentally, there's no definitive. People can go, what? What do you want about? A friend of mine, once again, many years ago, he was a professor of physics at Oxford University, an Australian guy, and I've sadly lost touch with him. But we were talking about this one day, and he said what he loves about it, he said, it's what he loves about physics. He said, because got a box, and that box, you open the box and there's a question inside. And to answer the question, you need to open the next box. But there's always another question inside. Reality, how do we know it's real? Oh, okay, there's that. Oh, but there's another question. So he said what he loves about it is that you get to the final box. And not everyone will necessarily agree with this, but you get to the final box and there's nothing inside. It's all made up. It's all a set of hypotheses or a set of theories or whatever. Now, is that the absolute truth? No. I know people who absolutely believe there is a given purpose or there is a given answer or whatever. And whilst I don't agree with that, I respect it. And it may be that the perspective I choose to take is wrong. All I know is that people being willing to take that journey and discover and explore, it provides something in the quality of life, in the quality of our relationships, in the quality of the results we produce. And, when I look out at the world, particularly as it is now, I think there's a lot of room for us to be interested in the quality of our relationships, how we relate to ourselves and each other. We don't seem to, at one level, we seem to be doing extraordinarily. There's extraordinary people doing extraordinary stuff on the planet. I look at the other stuff, the wars, the violence, the dysfunctional families, all that. There's a lot of room for us to maybe discover, if we're willing to, some more so that we can move forward and have it work for all of us.
Thank you so much for that, Dave. I really appreciate that. I really do. Sometimes the argument moves between critical thinking to sometimes more critical thinking. and it's good. That is what we do here. I remember that there are some interviews that I've done and it lasts hours because they just need explanation, and it is good too that we do that. What is the sense of it? What is the essence of it? People say that when you set goal, for example, you say, "Oh, I want to make money," but making money is what you're going to realize. It's not that because I'm a wealthy person, or I'm saying that based on the goal that I've set for myself and the experiences that I've got from them. Making money is not what is going to make you happy, but what do you become in the process of making money? I'm just using that as an example, no? In that, I think what the professor friend of yours told you make a lot of sense. In that it's not really the last bus that is the most important, but in the process of opening the buses, you open this one, you move to the next one, then to the next one.
Yeah, I can get that.
If the last bus is what's actually the thing, which is the making money that people usually say, it's useless because nothing is there. So life is useless, but life is not useless.
I always find it an interesting question to ask. When people talk about what they want to make money, I ask them why. I said, and then we get into a conversation about what would you want to be doing if money wasn't an issue, if you had forever. Now, I have a relation who, even as a young boy, was fascinated by money. And he's, he followed that path, and he's done very well for himself in the financial sector. And he still loves doing that. But he also, there are other values running his life as well. But I always find it interesting to ask that question, what is it you'd want to do if money wasn't a question? Because most people, it's like, well, this is what I'd love to do. And money has become almost this reaction. It's kind of like, oh, that's what we should do, or that will solve things and so on. I understand. Listen, I've never been really, really poor, but I've experienced the impact of not having enough money to do what I'd like to be able to do, or it's not even about what I'd like to be able to do what I find necessary. But I think it's interesting when we actually can start to, well, what is it I want to do? What is it, the difference I want to make, or what I want to do for myself that money would allow me to do? And I think sometimes people have lost sight, or we all lose sight of that, and get very caught up in, oh, let's earn money, let's earn lots of money and so on. And it can become, I'm not saying it does, but it can kind of lose some essence of almost soulless,
Thank you so much for that, Dave. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Now, we're moving towards the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
Now, you have somebody who is learning. They want to learn how to untangle his or herself. Somebody who is taking a conscious decision, knowing that there is a problem. What are the steps? What are your recommendations for an individual who need to help his or herself?
Well, of course, I would recommend they come and speak with me. But let's take that out of the picture for a moment. There are a lot of different places people can move forward. People can find themselves a coach. And, I recommend having a conversation with a number of coaches and getting clear the different types of coaches and what you want from a coach. There are courses you can do, which are not quite the same as having a one-to-one coach, but provide some extraordinary results as well. There are books you can read. My experience is, for most of us, reading a book doesn't provide the same thing as having a coach, whether that's a coach in a course or whether that's a coach one-to-one. Because we've talked about the machinery, the survival mechanism, whatever you want to call it, reading a book without the outside input from someone else is likely to be that machinery reading, the survival mechanism. So I've had coaches speak with me quite what could be considered harshly, very in my face, to have me go, oh, yeah, I've just seen that. And I also, I was someone I work with. He's on a team I'm working with, and I provide coaching with him. And I was incredibly straight with him the other day. I said, can you see your default way of thinking that you would ask that question? He said, oh yeah. I said, if that wasn't there, what other question would you be asking? What is it you'd be really interested in here? Now, it took me being quite straightforward in his face for him to get that, because and just reading a book, my default will be reading it, so fitting it into what I already know. So I'd recommend speaking with someone, whether it be in a course or whether it be one-to-one. And there is some great stuff out there on the internet or in books that's also worth looking at. Yeah, the first thing is get curious, get interested. What could be possible?
Okay, now, as a coach, what tool do you use to help people untangle themselves? Okay, we were talking about an individual who's trying to do it themselves, so you give them some recommendation. But what we know based on statistics and data is that in most of the cases, you do need help.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now they need help. They have a coach. Now, as a coach, what do you do with them to help them untangled?
This could sound almost flippant. We have a conversation. I have certain exercises I have people do, but it really depends what they're dealing with. I have models I use to help people understand. It's not just about the understanding, but it starts with them understanding, oh, I can see, oh yes, as a human, I can recognize myself doing that way of thinking. But then it takes them, I'll ask them questions about, well, what do you see in your life? What do you see? Where do you find yourself stopped by that? So those kind of questions. So it's all a conversation. There are other models I use, very simply, I use a goal setting exercise with people. And I'm smiling because I'm remembering a client of mine a couple of years ago. She came back to me. She said, I hated that exercise. I said, okay, tell me about that. And she said, it was extraordinary. She said, I got so much out of it, but she said it made me uncomfortable because I didn't want to look at what I wanted. And, someone else, I always invite people to pick a date many years out, not just 3 months, 6 months, 5 years, whatever. And she picked 30 years down the line. And she described in it the business she wanted to build. She described in it the relationship she wanted. She hadn't met the person yet. She described in it the relationship with her daughter, her currently teenage daughter, and where that was going to go. It was really her creating. But when I read through what she'd written, I was moved to tears. So there are different ways of approaching it, different models I use, different conversations I have with people, but the tool I'm using is my training, my being able to listen for what's needed in that conversation. I've got a conversation with a client of mine this afternoon. She just came to me this morning. She said, have you got some time for half an hour to have a conversation? I said, sure. And I went back to her and I said, tell me about the situation. What is it you want in the call? And she told me, and I can immediately start hearing things. And she's trained, she's a coach as well. But I could hear things that she may not be awake to. So what tools do I use? I use questions, I use my voice, I use listening. I don't have a particular model I use. Some people will talk about, we use appreciative inquiry or action learning or whatever. There are a lot of different tools out there. I don't align myself to one particular tool. what I do is I work with people so that they can start to see things they hadn't seen before, which are related to what they want to accomplish. And sometimes they see things they hadn't seen before, which are not what they came into the course for, or the process for. There's someone I was working with a few years ago, fabulous guy, he's in his 60s, was just setting up a new business. And he had worked in the financial sector for many, many years. He said he wanted to learn newly. He said he'd been told by someone close to him that he lacked empathy. So we were getting to work on that. And it was focused on his business. But then he started talking about how he'd never been there for his daughters when they were growing up. And what opened up was him having some conversations with his daughters, which he didn't expect to have. And his one daughter said to him, she said, it's extraordinary. She said, 2 years ago, I did a course and I've been trying to figure out a way to have a particular conversation with you ever since I did that course. And here you are coming to have that conversation with me. She said, I'm not even sure what just happened. But it's like that really opened something up in that relationship. And that's not what he expected or came into the course for. So we kept focused on his business as well. But people get things they don't expect to get out of it. I know I did, when I first did the first course I ever did, I went in it wanting, if I told the truth at the time, I wanted a romantic relationship. Now, I had a massive breakthrough in my way I related to women out of that, but it also transformed my relationship with my dad, which is not something I went into the course through. And I had a good relationship with him beforehand, but it totally transformed him such that when he passed away in 2007, the age of 85, there was nothing left for me to say to him. The relationship we had was so precious to me, and it wasn't something that occurred beforehand as a problem, but it opened up a whole new area for me having done that course.
Thank you for that. As you were talking, the image that is rolling in my head, I understand that you said that you are not I think you say you were not religious or spiritual, something like that.
I'm not.
Okay, all right. There is something there is a concept within African spirituality that says that everything is part of everything, that you cannot take out a single thing and treat it just for itself, because a single thing doesn't exist. If you want to talk of a human being, you also must talk about the land where he lives. You also must talk about the air around him. You also must talk about the plant around him. All of them are part of what make him a human being, including the people, including before what have happened, including what is going to happen in the future. So it becomes very complex looking at it in this sense now. But anyway, why am I saying that? In that sometimes it is difficult to treat something just as a thing. Everything is always part of it. But now you might come to say you want to talk about the hand, the finger, let me use that. But the finger doesn't work. The finger have no feeling. The finger will be nothing without the brain, without a human being. So it makes perfect sense to me that you went for a course, but you got a different result than what you had before or what you have in your mind.
I get it totally. And part of why I'm laughing and smiling is I love what you're talking about there. The thought that immediately comes to mind is in the area of health and medicine. And one of the complaints that people tend to have a lot of the time about, let's call it mainstream Western medicine, is that it can tend to, and I stress the word can, tend to try to deal with stuff as isolated from each other. And those Western medical practitioners who embrace what you're talking about, it's all part of. It's not even just, it's not even no separation between the mind and the body, but, no separation between that and the environment. And, and when we get that, we're all connected and everything's connected. There's something really powerful about it. So as you were I loved what you were sharing about there. And as you're speaking about that, it's just brought that to mind.
Thank you so much for that. Now, I have a thought. I asked you a question before, and you were telling me there is no definite yes or no to this. In that sometimes we're still in the process of becoming. all of us, the entire system
Yeah.
is still becoming, we're still growing. Because if we get to where we want to be, we don't have any reason to be anymore. Instead, we are continuously being, we are continuously becoming, therefore there is a reason to wake up tomorrow. All right, now, if there is no definite yes or no to whether you want to refer to it as reality or all of that, somebody might be wondering, what I don't know the definite sense to this. Why the hustle? Why should I do it? Like, I want to go back again to your professor friend who talked about the bosses, no? You are opening one boss, then you go to open another boss, and you go to open another boss again. How do you, and you come to the end of the boss, the last boss, nothing is there. Now, somebody might be asking, but they didn't write somewhere the sense of it. How do I make sense out of it? In my life, there is no book I need to read about my life. I need to literally live to have an experience. I can't read about my experience in a book, because I am the book. I am the whole of it. Now, how do we make sense of it? That is actually the question.
I'm hesitating because I'm not sure there's a definitive answer to that. And we do. There's a great phrase from some of the work I participated in it's about choosing. You could say it's about making sense of it, or creating purpose, or whatever, because I really get what you're talking about. If there is no right or wrong, if there's no definitive answer, if there's nothing in that final box, how do we make sense of it? How do we give our life that purpose going forward? And the phrase that comes to mind is about choosing, and it's a bit of it is taking the past into account. So when we get a certain facility to separate ourselves from the story we've made up, we can still take it into account. So I'll give you almost a silly example, but at some point I got that I could create a romantic relationship with anyone. I had an experience, and it was quite shocking at the time. It's like, oh my God. I created, and it was almost like one of those moments of there being nothing in the box. It's all made up. I was like, what do I do with it? And then the question is, well, what am I going to base creating a romantic relationship, or even whether I do create one, on? And there's what I really enjoy. You know, my wife and I, if for want of a better word, push the right buttons with each other. We push a lot of the wrong buttons as well, by the way. We've married approaching 40 years, you know, and we push a lot of the wrong buttons. We irritate each other at times, and we love each other. And so there are those reactions, which are all from the past. And I'm not saying chuck all of that out, or, you know, the fact there's nothing in that box isn't saying chuck all of that out. But we have a choice about what of that stuff we follow. So we have a choice about, oh, okay, I'm going to follow what I enjoy doing. You know, I used to be a chef. I love cooking. I enjoy doing that. And I made a choice not to follow that. I could have made a choice to follow that. So how do we decide? How do we make sense of it? When my clients ask me that type of question, I may have something to say, like I've just said, but I reiterate and I stress that they need to discover for themselves. Because me giving the answer will just be another piece written in a book, like an answer. When people discover it for themselves and go, oh, okay, then something opens up newly. So yeah, I don't have a definitive answer for you. And I've just said a lot of stuff in order to be able to say I don't have a definitive answer. It's what I do.
Thank you so much for that. I think that is a better answer. That you put the power back in the hands of the people. You tell them that you're powerful because now you can decide for yourself what is fit, where do you want to go.
Yeah.
It's your choice. I think I have a son that is 7 years old and is going to 8. What I really want to do for my son is to show him the truth that I know. When I have done that, I don't need to be afraid because I have done the part that I need to play. I have played my role. I know that he will be well with him. When I wanted to give my son a name, I gave him a name also that is important for me and for our culture. I call him Efwa. Efwa in our language means light. And I expect him to be able to live up to that if I have played my role too. So I believe that we should put the power in the hands of the people, not always say, oh, this is it, this is it, this is that, this is that, this is that. If we do that, we put people in square that they can never go out of that. But if we tell them, after all this, it depends on you. Call it whatever you want to call it. Decide what it is. It's up to you.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because I'll say this. There's a whole conversation culturally, societally, about, you could say, about thinking. You mentioned critical thinking. Other people talk about critical thinking, about people having the right to self-determination versus government, small government, big government. We can get in a whole political discussion there. But I think as human beings and society, we're not very good at this yet. There's a fine line to walk, because on one hand, enabling people to really recognize they have that power and to respect and honor people having that power. And then on the other hand, to recognize we have a planet with 7 billion people on it, and a country here in the UK with 60 million people roughly. And how do you set things up so it works best for everyone? So everyone can operate in that. Because if you go to one extreme, putting the power back in the hands of the people totally, it can become almost anarchic. But then the other way is trying to impose rules everywhere. And, our leadership, we've had very few leaders who are in the history of the world who are good at, if any, who are good at juggling that balance, like finding a place that communicating in such a way that people are like, wow, okay, yeah, I get that power for myself and I recognize how to work with all of everyone together. So, yeah, it is absolutely giving people that power, and then what we do with it and how we get people working together with that power. That's a challenge. one worth taking on, I think.
Yeah. A nice one. But I think we shouldn't be scared. If we are scared because we haven't done our work, at least from the point of view of those who are supposed to relegate the power to the people. Because if we are thinking that they will not be able to manage it, because we haven't prepared them enough to be able to manage it, therefore we are scared now. Anyway, if we open that box again, we could have a lot to talk about it, because I really love the point that you are raising there now. By the way, that is fine. We'll come back. That gives us the reason to come back maybe another time. Now, people that want to connect with you, Dave, because they listen to you to this point, they love you, they want to learn more and connect with you. Tell them how to connect with you.
Yeah. Well, I know that you're going to edit this podcast and you'll put things with it. I know you've asked me for a picture and a biography. And at the end of that, there's my phone number and there's my email address and there's my LinkedIn profile. And those are probably the best ways. After many years, there's a website in the process of getting launched and it's not quite live yet. So at some point that'll be available, but not before you publish this podcast. So yeah, my email, my phone or my LinkedIn profile, the easiest ways to find me. And finding me on LinkedIn is really easy because I'm the only Dave Rindl, I think, on the planet actually, but certainly on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's great. Meaning the way you are branding yourself now become quite easy, no? All right, I want to really thank you, Dave. It really have been an interesting conversation here and full of value. So, how would you conclude it? This has really been really truly beautiful conversation.
How would I conclude it? I have no idea. I want to thank you first of all. It's been lovely speaking with you, but also getting to know you during this and a previous conversation we had, or starting to get to know you. How would I conclude it? Yeah, there are two things that come to mind, and they're both, I'm reticent about saying them because they feel like cliches, but I'm going to say them anyway. One is the phrase dare to dream. And I'd say that in dreaming, consider whatever's there for you in the moment you think of dare to dream. Consider your dreams could be way bigger. What you're dreaming at the moment is limited, and I include myself in that, you know. And then the other thing is, as a saying, and I've gone blank on the name of the person who made this quote, and I'll qualify it with something just after it. But it's the question she posed is, what are you going to do with your one wild, and I think it wasn't the word passionate, but passionate will do. What are you going to do with your one wild and passionate life? The word passionate is wrong. And yeah, I'd invite all of us to, what are we going to do with our lives? And the qualifier is that it's not necessarily about doing something big or, noble or whatever. And it can be. And I'm all into people who want to make a difference and want to champion something. But her answer to it was she was going to walk more through fields barefoot and smell the flowers and so on. So whatever that may be for you, I think it's a valuable question. Now, there you are, two cliched questions, and people will make of them what they will.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Dave. It really have been really very beautiful. I appreciate it. I appreciate the time and also the sharing here. Thank you very much.
Such a pleasure. I look forward to, as I said, getting to know you better, Obehi, and thank you for what you provide here. It's been a joy.